Good afternoon and welcome to the Zurich Film Festival talk. Exactly 2 years ago, on October 2nd, 2018, the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi entered his country's consulate in Istanbul. His fiancée, Hatice Cengiz, was waiting outside. The two wanted to get married the very next day. Khashoggi, who had been living in self-imposed exile in the US, needed some documents for the wedding. Hatice waited outside for hours, but her fiancé did not come back. Khashoggi never came out of the consulate again. He was murdered and his body mutilated by a Saudi hit squad. The Saudi authorities, after repeatedly denying that Khashoggi was killed in the consulate, had to acknowledge that he died there. And later, the kingdom's public prosecutor said Khashoggi had been killed by a team of Saudi agents sent to convince him to come back to Saudi Arabia. The CIA and other foreign intelligence agencies believe that the Saudi murderers were sent to Turkey by the most powerful man in Saudi Arabia, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Calls for an international investigation to determine who at the highest level of the state was involved in Mr. Khashoggi's killing were not successful. Just a couple of weeks ago, a court in Riyadh convicted 8 low-level operatives to prison sentences for the Khashoggi killing. The trial was held in secrecy. Not even the names of the suspects were revealed. The Academy Award-winning director Bryan Fogel made a documentary about Mr. Khashoggi and his killing. The Dissident will be shown tonight at the Zurich Film Festival as an international premiere. I'm very honored to welcome all our guests on this extraordinary panel. I would like to start with Khashoggi's fiancée, Hatice Cengiz. Thank you for being here after all you went through.
Thank you very much.
Welcome also Bryan Fogel. With your first documentary, Icarus, 2 years ago, you won straight away an Oscar, and you make yet another splash with The Dissident. I welcome also Agnès Callamard. She's the special rapporteur appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council. She has a mandate to report on issues related to extrajudicial killings, and she wrote a report about the Khashoggi killing. I welcome also Anne-Marie Buzatu. She's the senior advisor at ICT for Peace, the foundation that hosts this panel and that supports peace and human dignity in information communication technologies. My name is Gordana Mijuk. I'm the head of the international section at the NZZ am Sonntag, which is written just above here in this building. We will talk on this panel for 45 minutes, and then I want to open up the questions for you. Bryan, congratulations to this documentary. It's full of suspense, and at the same time, it's an eye-opener. It shows a context that I was not aware of. I'm sure we come back to that. But can you tell us, why did you decide to make this film? What intrigued you about this horrific case?
Well, following Icarus and being honored with the Academy Award, it felt in many ways a burden to me because it made it that I really felt personally that I had to. My next work and the next film that I was going to make would take on similar subject matter, would tackle issues of essentially conspiracy, cover-up, crime, and hopefully illuminate and shed a light on issues that are much larger than ourselves. And I was searching for that project. And when Khashoggi vanished from the consulate, inside the consulate on October 2nd, I began following the story, as I think many, many in the world did. And what immediately struck me from it was that this is a Washington Post journalist. He's a Saudi journalist, but he's working for the Washington Post. He was being portrayed in many factions of the Western media as Muslim Brotherhood, as a terrorist sympathizer. And then as I started reading his writings and reading what he was writing about, and reading his Twitter feed, I saw that this was actually not the case at all. He was advocating for freedom of speech. He was advocating for freedom of press. He was advocating for his people of Saudi Arabia, a country that he loved, to be able to have basic liberties and rights that all of us sitting in this room here today take for granted. So he was not who he was being painted as. At the same time, I'm reading the story of Hatice Cengiz and the incalculable loss and trauma that she was going through, which nobody in this room hopefully could ever imagine or experience. And then I was reading about Omar Abdulaziz, the Saudi dissident living in Montreal, who was claiming that Saudi Arabia had sent a kill team for him, that they were trying to rendition him. And even more importantly, his phone had been hacked using Pegasus software as well as Khashoggi's phone. And they knew of everything that the two of them were working on to essentially try to take control of the false narrative that Saudi Arabia was putting forward on Twitter using fake campaigns and bots and Twitter trolls. So these combination of elements really made me feel that there was a story to be told. And what hinged on that for me was whether or not I'd be able to gain the trust and whether or not I would be able to gain the access of Hatice, Omar, Agnès, the Turkish investigators, and the Washington Post to be able to truthfully and authentically tell this story, but at the same time, hopefully be able to craft it into a thriller. So, I began on this journey basically October 15th, the day that Saudi Arabia admitted that he had in fact died in the consulate. My first call was to Karen Attiah at the Washington Post, who was Jamal's editor. The Post immediately opened their doors to me. I was sitting with the editors of the Washington Post, I believe it was on October 20th. They said that they would work with me and that they would allow me to interview them and share information. And I then set out to try to make contact with Hatice. I arrived in Istanbul, I believe it was around the second week of November. And Hatice and I spent the next 3 months not filming, but building trust, building a relationship, building a rapport that she knew that if we were going to work together, that I wasn't looking at this from a point of view of, I'm here with my camera and I'm going to shoot for a few days and take off, but that I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. And I want to work with you and I want to follow you and I want to help you on this journey. And I want to make sure that I can authentically tell your story and hopefully make the world love Jamal as much as you love Jamal. And if you're able to do that, potentially we have a chance of making change. And so that's where this journey began. And that's kind of where my, I guess, motivation behind wanting to make this film began.
Mm-hmm. How did you find Omar? He has a crucial role in your storytelling. How did you find his trust?
Omar Abdulaziz lives in Montreal in self-exile. He left Saudi Arabia when he was 19 years old to be a student in Canada. And at the time that he left to be a student, and this still goes on, Saudi Arabia helps send students abroad, pays for their educations to be educated in the West with the commitment that they will come back to Saudi Arabia and work after having their education being paid for in the West. So Omar came to Montreal to go to school. At the time, he spoke not a word of English. Actually took residence with a Jewish family as he comes into Montreal, which was completely shocking to him after coming from Saudi Arabia. And quickly, as he explains it to me, starts understanding that, these Canadians are nice people. The Westerners seem to be very friendly. He starts learning English, and he immediately starts realizing that what's going on in his country is not what is being painted, meaning what is being painted in the West in his country is actually not the reality. So he starts falling in love with the West and the people that he's in school with. And at this time is essentially the rise of the Arab Spring. And the Arab Spring took root on Twitter. The Twitter basically empowered the Arab Spring. It allowed all these activists from all over the world to, and especially in the Arab world, to have a voice and have a way to come together and congregate. And Omar obviously is starting to see this on Twitter, see this action among the youth in these Arab countries wanting change of these totalitarian regimes, these dictatorships, these, illegitimate presidencies, right? And Omar starts taking to Twitter. And in so doing, he immediately becomes an enemy of the Saudi state, because he starts criticizing basically the government within Saudi Arabia, which is completely and utterly off limits. And it reaches a point that he goes back to visit his family in Saudi. And while he's there visiting his family, because his mother has cancer, they come to arrest him. And his father, who was actually a Saudi intelligence officer, tells his son, you have two choices. You either go in and they're going to arrest you and you will be silenced for the rest of your life. If you ever speak anything, you will and you will not be able to leave the country, or you get out of here. And Omar basically turned around. He went to the airport. He left Saudi Arabia. He returned to Canada, has never returned, has lived in self-exile since, while the Saudis have attempted to rendition him. His brothers are jailed, tortured. They've tortured members of his family. His family lives under a travel ban, and he remains in Canada under the protection of the Canadian government while he continues his activism work on Twitter against the Saudis. And so when I went to approach him, he was very, he didn't know me. He didn't know what my intentions were. He knew I was a filmmaker. He had heard I'd, won awards, but that wasn't enough. And so it was the same experience where I was literally going and spending a month in Istanbul, then going and spending 3 weeks in Montreal, then back for a month in Istanbul, then back for 3 weeks in Montreal, back and forth and back and forth. And every time that I filmed with Omar, for about the first 4 months, I would leave the camera cards with him. And by the time about 4 months had went, he had probably about $70,000, $80,000 worth of camera cards and all of our media and everything that we had shot. But that was my way of building trust with him, because he wasn't sure yet that he was ready to tell his story. He was grieving just as Hatice was grieving. And by leaving those camera cards, he understood that I was there for the long haul, that I was there to work with him, that I wasn't there to just go take his story and leave. And eventually, I think it was about 4 or 5 months in, I shoot with Omar, and he hands me back all the camera cards. And that was how I built his trust.
Yes. Did you ever try to be in contact with Saudi authorities for your movie, to ask them what they have to say?
It felt irrelevant, and it still feels irrelevant. the reason why it felt irrelevant and the reason why there was no need to contact the Saudis, it would be like calling Vladimir Putin and saying, did you have a decades-long doping scheme to dope all Russian athletes? And he's going to go, no, of course I didn't. I know nothing about it. Did you poison Navalny? No. Did you poison, you just go on and on and on, and it's going to be denied, 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 denied. Did you poison Litvinenko? No. Did you hack the election? No. So that was the same response you were going to get out of the Saudis. There was no need to ask them what had happened because the evidence was the evidence. The Turkish had audio recordings. There was a transcript. There was Agnès Callamard's exceptional investigation. So what were you going to gain from the Saudis other than to A, have them deny, and B, increase focus on my filmmaking of bringing this story forward? So and the style of filmmaking that I make is really to try to craft a narrative feature thriller that just so happens to be a documentary so that audiences will engage and be on the edge of their seat and care about that story and grow emotionally connected. So I never once reached out to the Saudis because frankly, I gave two shits what they had to say. They murdered Khashoggi. They chopped him up. We had the evidence. I heard the audio that Omar had been secretly recording. What were you going to say? I didn't do it. So what was their point? To either A, get a denial, or for B, to them to sort of callously justify a crime which is unjustifiable, or put forward a statement which they have repeatedly through Agnes's calls for justice and Hatice's calls for justice, that this is a Saudi crime. And this is the jurisdiction of Saudi Arabia.
I do understand what you mean. You said in an interview, you hope that your movie or your film is going to make countries and governments and business people reassess their relationship to Saudi Arabia. Do you feel anything like that going on? That goes into that direction? That people wake up now?
I'm an activist. I'm an advocate. I'm a human rights supporter. And when I set out to tell a story, I'm doing it because I fall in love with the people that I'm working with and want to tell their stories. And I feel really deeply committed to the story and in this case, what is the justice behind it. I don't believe and I don't hold out hope that MBS will not ascend to the throne. I don't hold out hope that, that the regime will just change. But what I do believe is that cinema and film has the power to make change. And the example that I can give you is when I was working on Icarus, it was me and Gregory Rodchenkov that actually brought the story of Russia's decades-long doping program to the New York Times. And the New York Times then reported this story in a multi-page expose. It went global. It was reported all over the world, and it was a huge scandal. And the evidence was irrefutable. There were then following investigations that set out, much like Agnes's investigation, but this time with a guy by the name of Richard McLaren, that was able to prove all the evidence that Gregory had brought forward. Scratches on the bottle, that they had opened the bottles, they had thrown out the urine, and then there were spreadsheets dating back years and years and years of a vast array of evidence that this wasn't just the Sochi Winter Games. This was all sport, all games, that basically every single Russian medal ever won was not legitimate. Now, even after that reporting in the New York Times and this global story, while the world cared, much like they did about Khashoggi, nothing actually happened. It was, wow, this is terrible. Wow, maybe there should be sanctions against Russia. Maybe we should punish them. But it didn't happen. Icarus came out in August of 2017, and it was quickly seen by hundreds of millions of people around the globe. And suddenly, the International Olympic Committee, which was essentially in bed with the Russians because the Russians are financing the Olympic Committee, realized now that they had a true crisis on their hands and they had to do something. 5 months later, they banned Russia from the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympic Games. And had Russia, had the 2020 Summer Games happened, Russia was going to be banned again. That was the result of Icarus. And the IOC, in their reasons decision behind banning Russia, even cited the film. So to me, that is the power of filmmaking that press and media and conventional forms of journalism and news media can often not accomplish. You can look at other films in the past, whether it was Blackfish, that essentially closed down SeaWorld and showed the plight of what these killer whales and other animals at SeaWorld were going through. You can look at The Cove and the dolphin killing that was going on off of Japan that was quickly then condemned and banned. And it's my hope that with The Dissident, that people around the world fall in love with Jamal, fall in love with Hatice, understand that there are thousands of political prisoners sitting in Saudi Arabia who have done nothing more than send out a tweet asking for human rights and asking for some sort of democracy in their country, and that they hear Agnès Callamard's words and understand that this is the truth. And if this becomes a global movement, then there possibly is change, because what we have seen over and over and over again is the money and power and big business triumph over everything. And we know this to be the case because even though all the leaders of the world have condemned this crime, none of them, other than Turkey, has tried to actually seek justice for these murders. And none of them have done anything of meaning or impact other than to say this was a terrible crime. And here we have the G20 happening on November 20th in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh. The leaders of the world are going to go to Riyadh and basically shake hands and be buddies with a murderer. And so I do believe that there can be reform and there can be change, but it has to come at the mass public level that pressures their leaders to actually take action.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Hatice, thank you again for being here. Tell me, how do you see your role now in this activism that Bryan just laid out?
I feel we should listen Bryan more and more and more, because during 2 years he couldn't speak about anything. He just shoot and visit the people and countries, and he felt a lot of things he couldn't tell that story. So now I understand him more, by the way, because he was too busy with the work or the shooting, right? And when he came at the beginning, I remember that day after the murder, maybe 3 weeks or maybe mostly months, I was living away from real life, from the people and from the real life. I mean, like a cave, a small cave. I was feeling more big fear in my heart, not fear like, but it's pain with fear for what happened. I try to understand, because the 2 weeks after the murder, we couldn't know what happened. After maybe 2 weeks, they announced the killing. So I was hoping that Jamal alive and Jamal will come out and then he will explain what happened inside the consulate. And I did not want to give any interview with any channel. So I was trying to protect myself from the television, from the cameras. And it was so difficult to explain, even the 2 years. And then when you start speaking about the summary, and my brain working very different. And when you saying some words, it becomes me like crazy. Something I remember sometimes I feel very bad when someone came and speak about this story from the beginning until now. It makes me, yes, what happened, it's happened. I realize the whole thing's happened in my life, and I'm speaking now with Agnès and with Bryan. What happened? I see myself from the outside, someone speaking behind me, but I'm not this woman. I'm not Hatice. I'm not another people.
So you're still realizing that this is your reality you're in.
I can't realize them 100% every time. But what happened after. Then he came, and he came like an American filmmaker. By the way, he came a very difficult and painful time. And then he become Bryan, and then he become my friend, and he made me like special lady, tells her story, special lady like friend, like brother and sister. In our language we say brother and sister. I don't know, it's understandable. Anyway, and then he bring me the time to realize what he will do in this film. And then and our story started in that day. So what I feel right now, I think it most important work or record or evidence after the murder, this film, because the people will understand what happened inside us, inside the people. I mean, you can't understand the whole story as a summary. If you want to get like specialist in Saudi Arabia or in this murder, you can find a lot of information from the internet, from the websites and from the channels, but you can understand, maybe complete the picture what happened in reality. So this film with Bryan and me and the others, and by the way, I remember now Agnès when she came, I'm so sorry for that day, and he's a so humble person. She was asking me, and then I asked her, can you please tell me your CV? And I did not believe her. She will do something different, because I understood the very bad things in a very short time from the countries, from the European countries, from the UN, from the United States. And then I was asking, what you will do? You are the not country. You are not coming from the USA. It's just a theater or something. And then I asked a very hard question. I'm sorry, Agnès, but and she did very, very important and good job. But I understand now more than before. Of course, I understood the politics a little bit, but I'm not, of course, unhappy what I understood. So that's why I help this film. I help this journey with Bryan. It's not I help. I share my story. It's not helping. He helped me. She helped me. I can say I'm proud of be part of this journey with them. He was the best name, I believe, that day to share my story with him, and she also played a very important and unusual part in this journey. Also, she became my friend, like a big sister for me, and that's it.
Agnès Callamard, as US Special Rapporteur, you said there is evidence that the highest level of state are involved in this killing. What is that evidence? Can you tell us a bit what your report that you did about the killing, what does it say?
Thank you very much for welcoming me. It's a pleasure to be here with my friends. So the killing of Jamal Khashoggi was, in fact, a multiple killings. And I'm sorry if you've already heard that before, but I think it's important to repeat that he was killed. But in addition to that, he was disappeared, because we still don't know where his body remains are. And under international law, unless it is very clear what happened to the remains, it remains a case of enforced disappearance. He was also tortured in terms of how they went about to kill him. And then there are the other dimension of the crime. It was a violation of the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. It was a violation of the UN Charter prohibiting the use of force in times of peace extraterritorially. It was an attack, a crime against Turkey. It was a crime against the United States. And by extension, because many of those crimes constitute customary law, the prohibition of them, it was a crime against the international community altogether. So the nature of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi is quite unprecedented, and it has multiple dimensions. The responsibility of the state for that crime left very little doubt, based on the evidence collected and based on the interpretation of the evidence against international human rights standards. The only logical implication is that the state of Saudi Arabia is responsible for the crime. At the most basic level, the team of 15 men were all officials of the state. They traveled, some of them with diplomatic passport. Their private jet, resourced by the state, at diplomatic clearance. An operation of that nature is expensive. It was heavily resourced by the state, not by private individuals. The responsibility of the state is also directly involved in what happened after the killing, when Saudi Arabia, the state, sent a team of 18 individuals to supposedly investigate the crime scene, but in fact to prevent Turkish investigators from coming in and during that time cleaning up the crime scene. So the notion that this could have been a rogue operation just flies in light of the evidence and in light of the international standard regarding state responsibility. There is nothing in that crime that could lead anyone, not just me, to conclude that this was the action of individuals acting of their own decision-making. So that's the first thing. We establish the responsibility of the state. The second step would be to determine who within the state is responsible for the killing. I am a human rights investigator, so in many ways my job stops at determining the extent and the nature of state responsibilities. In that case, building on some precedent within the human rights community, I explored the level of liability within the state. I looked at the chain of command and the international standard regarding the chain of command, as well as the comparative jurisprudence and standard at national level regarding chain of command. All of those, the fact plus this legal analysis led me to conclude that the responsibility of Mohammed bin Salman is involved. What I could not conclude is at which level. If you have a spectrum of chain of command, it is at one extreme, the person who ordered the crime, and a little bit below that chain of command, but still liable, is failure to intervene, failure to stop, failure to protect. So this spectrum, somewhere on that spectrum, lays the responsibility of Mohammed bin Salman. I could not conclude at which extreme of a spectrum is his responsibilities, materially speaking. Circumstantially speaking, there was the knowledge that we have on how the state of Saudi Arabia function. And we do know that an operation of this nature is very unlikely, almost impossible to be carried out without his say-so. That's circumstantial. And then we have the CIA assessment, the CIA which provided a private confidential briefing to the US Congress, during which they revealed that they knew that Mohammed bin Salman had ordered the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, but they could not make that information public, and neither could.
In Saudi Arabia is the platform where public opinion is made. 8 out of 10 Saudis are on Twitter, which is incredibly high. And the problem is, of course, that Mohammed bin Salman controls this public sphere by an army of trolls. Anne-Marie, you're an expert in ICT and freedom of speech. In the movie, we see how easy it is for a state to manipulate people's opinions on Twitter. The new technologies seems to be perfect to manipulate us. How can we avoid that, even in the West? Very easy question, I'm sorry.
Very, very easy question, and thank you. It's really an honor to be here and to partner with the ZFF and to organize this event. Now, this is my way of giving you a little time to answer that question, because it's not an easy answer. One of the things that has happened is that these technologies have very quickly developed. They have become, in a short period of time, something that we reach for almost immediately without thinking about. We check our social media feeds, and we haven't had them long enough to understand and develop the kinds of filters and reflexes that we should have when we are reading these media. If something that we see largely corresponds with our viewpoints and our what we think is right and true, we will often just accept it without even questioning. So in terms of how can we try to counter this, it's, I think, a multi-pronged approach. But it first of all perhaps comes to getting a more of a consensus among all parties about what we expect in our information and what we consider to be reliable information. So what this means is transparency about where the information has come from. What's the kind of methodology used to get this information? Who is funding this information? Who stands to gain from this information? If we all start to, these are basic journalistic standards that have been around for a long time, but we need to all incorporate these standards in how we approach this information. And so a way that I think that could have begin to counter some of this information is to reach that understanding, have governments, embrace this. Many of them are already running media literacy campaigns to try to educate the public about how to consider information, how to check them. Social media companies, in terms of their terms of service, what in their community standards for what they expect of information. Already we have seen in the face of the pandemic a real change and actually the possibility for the ability of social media companies to police the veracity and the truthfulness of information, because it's our health. But is it really so much less dangerous and harmful to us if it's our democracy? So, and then we as individuals, we need to have that reflex. We need to think, okay, wait a minute, before we forward it, before we just send it on or pass on the information on the social media platform, to think, okay, who is, those questions, who did this, who stands to gain, who's funding this? Is this really true? I'm going to check. It's not something that we often do, but it's something that we all have to do. And I think there are responsibilities at all levels, but if we're going to have we're going to change this, we're going to have to do this together.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add something? I think as well in the case of countries like Saudi Arabia or Iran, the individual reaction is extremely important, but it will not be sufficient.
Yeah.
Because in those countries, you have actually an instrumentalization, a weaponization of those platforms for the purpose of propaganda and thought control. So there, the responsibility of the platforms, which are usually not incorporated in those countries, is involved. I mean, in the case of Twitter, they've taken some actions repeatedly, in fact, to turn off a number of accounts, to cancel thousands of accounts which were trolls accounts. Facebook has done the same in other places. For instance, very recently in the Philippines, Facebook has taken steps to stop a number of accounts that were linked with the military and aimed at creating a propaganda. So the responsibility of the platforms, in my view, is directly involved. And I'm not suggesting that they should engage in censorship, but here we're talking about practical element. It's not about controlling the content. It's about controlling the fake account that are being established for the sole purpose of creating the sense of information, a sense of viewpoints which are actually completely manipulated and manufactured. In those countries, I think it is very important for the platforms to be particularly aware of the risk of propaganda and manipulation and be prepared to intervene in spite of their economic interest, which, as we all know, play a very large role in, unfortunately, their decision-making.
Thank you. As we are running a bit late, I would like to open up the questions to the audience. Who has a question? At the back, the lady. I think there are microphones around.
Merci. My question goes to Ms. Callamard, and I would like to follow up on the problem of private companies. What are the actual odds that the private company, NSO, which sold the surveillance technology to Saudi Arabia, what are the odds of actually holding that private company accountable? Because they knew what the technology will be used for.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I think here you're talking about NSO in particular, you're talking about Pegasus, that has already been mentioned. And as we now know, the phones of Mohammed Benazir and of other dissidents had been infiltrated by those malwares. The responsibility of NSO is, in our views, and I say our because I worked on those issues with David Kay, who was a special rapporteur on freedom of expression. Their responsibilities is directly involved. They knew or should have known the likelihood of their technology to be misused for the purpose of surveillance and indeed for the purpose of actual violation of the right to life. What can we do about it? We have made a number of recommendations. The first is that in our opinion, there should be an embargo at the moment on the export of surveillance technology because it is so difficult to put in place a regulatory regime that will prevent the misuse of the surveillance technology. That has not been carried forward, but at the very least, there are now certain steps being taken by countries so that the export of Pegasus and others be better monitored. Second is private action. So in the US, in Israel in particular, there are individuals that have filed that there are trials, ongoing trials, putting the focus on NSO and on Pegasus. It's, in Israel it hasn't worked very well so far. In the US it is. The cases are proceeding, and we need to keep doing that. We need to put those companies in front of their responsibility. Naming and shaming them is important, although maybe it's even possibly increasing their businesses if people come to know how successful they may be. I don't think we can call upon those companies on their own to self-regulate. I absolutely do not believe in self-regulation in that particular context. I'm prepared to consider self-regulation in many other contexts. In that one, I don't. I believe it is a responsibility of the countries where those companies are incorporated to impose a very strong regulation on the export and on the use of those technology. In a nutshell, but I think we do need to reach to the stage where there is a global awareness, understanding of the dangers that this kind of technology poses for democracy indeed. Now, there is also the question of Twitter and so on. Twitter is one of the company that, in fact, I believe is filing also some complaints against some of those companies. They were themselves infiltrated directly by Saudi Arabia. They had two staff members who acted as spies for Saudi Arabia within the Twitter staff, and they were able to identify the dissident and to track them down. So, technology is one thing. There is very traditional other mechanisms. We just need to be aware that surveillance is very high right now, and we got to find better mechanisms to protect ourselves.
Somebody's on the way. The microphone is on the way.
Thank you very much. I'm very impressed of all what you said today. I have a question to Mr. Bryan Fogel. What are your expectations? How many people will see your film the coming 1 or 2 years?
Well, COVID and the pandemic has certainly slowed that down. And when the film premiered at Sundance in the end of January, we've actually went back and continued to do some more work. So what will be shown tonight and tomorrow on Sunday is the first time anybody has seen the final film. But the reviews and the response was exceptional. I had initially hoped that a major global streamer, there's basically two of them, would carry the film that would allow, instantly for hundreds of millions of people around the globe to have access to it. That did not materialize as these companies themselves are conflicted and have conflicts within the region in Saudi Arabia and have business interests within the kingdom. So that leaves us with what we're doing now, which is theatrically distributing the film. The film will release in the middle of December in the United States, hopefully platform up onto 1,000 screens. It will then be available on a rental system. It will then hopefully go onto a streaming platform once the risk for that streamer to brand it as an original is gone. The same will be happening all over the world with incredible distributors. Here in Switzerland, we have DCM, which is a wonderful theatrical distributor. I don't know the exact date that they plan to release the film, but it will release in German, Swiss, Austrian cinemas. I'm sure it will then go on to a pay platform, and it'll then go on to a television platform. So it's my hope that over the next few years, hundreds of millions of people will see the film, I think word of mouth obviously goes a long way, and if a reaction globally for the film is what we experienced out of Sundance in January, that I'm very optimistic that even with COVID and the world and the way that it is, that that many, 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 many people around the globe will be able to see the film.
Who wants to ask the last question?
Yes, thank you. My name is Daniel Stauffacher from ICT for Peace Foundation, and I'm proud to be here today with you. Madam, as we're honoring Mr. Khashoggi today for what it stands for as a leader for free press and human dignity, and we are impressed by your courage, that how you handle the situation, and we are impressed by your personality. What is your plan? What is your strategy to move forward this? I think you have a special role to play in the cause that we are discussing today, and how overcome all these negative sides of information society or society in general. What is your role? What is your plan? Thank you.
I don't have any real plan. I was a civil and normal person before Jamal and even after Jamal, so I don't want to make myself like a strategist or planning to my future to get more like situation or name. But I want, or I like to change a little bit the fiancé of Jamal, because now I'm proud of my husband Jamal, but it makes you a more like identity, new identity, but it's not identity, it's a role. It was a role, but I want show my my life and myself in a different way in the future, by the way. And then I'm not planning, but sometimes life getting you a lot of choices. What happened right now and after Jamal, and I'm speaking with you right now here, and there is something optimistic, getting better with time, and with this film, and Agnès, my friends, Jamal friends. And I lost my husband, but I earn a lot of people after Jamal to get a little bit hopeful and happy. And all these points makes me more optimistic for the future. But of course, 100% change my thoughts and life. But the question is, I'm asking every day, which way is useful and more available to me to walk on it. But I think no one born as a human rights activist or the life become you these things. And if my destiny become me this, I will. But I don't know, I'm not planning. I hope it's enough for your question. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. So please go and see the movie tonight, The Dissident.
Or tomorrow, or Sunday.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Halbe Kraft.
Ist noch nicht desinfiziert, oder? Ich mache das schon gut.